On Saturday, April 13th at 8 p.m. GMT, Israel was subjected to 5 solid hours of unprecedented all-out aerial assault from Iranian forces. A barrage of over 120 ballistic missiles, 170 drones, and 30 cruise missiles were aimed at everywhere from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. Air raid sirens blasted in 720 locations across the nation. Iran dubbed it Operation True Promise, their first-ever direct attack against their long-held rival. It's an attack that left the international community on edge as they await Iran's next move. And yet, despite the intensity of the attack, when the smoke cleared, Israeli airbase Nevatim experienced only minor structural damage, and one of the only casualties was an injured 7-year-old girl. It doesn't make sense. How could Israel come out so relatively unscathed in the face of a seemingly devastating surprise attack? The answer lies in the actions of their allies, chief among them being the United States of America. But how did the United States fend off this attack and plan to fend off others? Why did Iran stage this attack in the first place? And what could this mean for the Middle East and the world at large? Right now, the historically unstable region has become more of a powder keg than it's ever been before, as Russia's goals of European expansion are held back only by a bloody conflict in Ukraine, China eyes Taiwan for invasion, and the violence in Gaza seems to put Israel and Iran, both heavily armed power players in the Middle East, on a potentially disastrous collision course, where U.S. geopolitical and military interests are intimately involved. It seems like at any moment the entire world could erupt into war. But most actions often end up just being reactions. Before we get into how the U.S. intervened on April 13th, we need to cast our eyes back to earlier in the month. On April 1, 2024, the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria, received a particularly brutal April Fool's surprise, a 6-missile airstrike deployed by an alleged strike force of Israeli F-35 warplanes, which destroyed the Iranian consulate annex building. While Israel has never officially claimed responsibility for the attack, The Guardian and the New York Times both reported that anonymous sources within the Israeli government confirmed that the nation was responsible for the attack. These assumptions hardly come out of thin air, especially when you're aware of the key context behind these back-and-forth attacks. While the violent conflict in Gaza between Israeli and Palestinian forces has only been raging in its elevated state since October 7, 2023, Iran and Israel have been locked into a proxy war since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. As Iran has been angling for dominance over the region through funding various militia and insurgent groups, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, all of which have played prominent roles in the recent conflict. Iran essentially views Israel as little more than a U.S. puppet, a vector for the Americans to exert geopolitical influence over surrounding nations without getting its hands dirty. By undermining Israel and forcing it to fight in a multi-front war with those various groups, Iran hopes to eventually shatter the nation's foothold. However, until now, this is all the conflict has been, a proxy war. What we're seeing in these attacks is a concerning transformation that puts two Middle Eastern titans into conflict more direct than we've ever seen before. It's widely believed that the primary target of the attack was Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a critical figure for maintaining the connection between Iran and groups like Hezbollah and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's even been confirmed by sources within the Iranian Revolutionary Guards that the attack happened during a meeting between Zahedi and the PIJ regarding the war in Gaza. If Zahedi was the intended target of the attack, then it was, by all accounts, a success. Zahedi was killed along with 15 others, 7 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, 5 Iran-backed militiamen, a Hezbollah fighter, an Iranian advisor, and tragically 2 civilians. The attack caused a global uproar, drawing criticism from the United Nations Security Council, as well as accusations that Israel violated the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, and Article 2 of the United Nations Charter by staging an attack against a diplomatic building. Peter Beaumont and Emma Graham Harrison of The Guardian also criticized the attack as an extremely risky act of escalation, suggesting that Israel had, quote, bulldozed through every red line to attack a location that Tehran maintains was tantamount to attacking Iranian soil. However, none were more enraged than Iran and Syria themselves, along with their associated groups. Iran was particularly galled given that Zahedi was their most high-ranking military official to be assassinated since the U.S. strike that killed General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. In the aftermath of the attack, Iran's Supreme National Security Council chaired by President Ebrahim Raisi, convened to discuss and plan appropriate reprisals. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said of the matter, "We will make them regretful about the crime and similar acts." As the situation seemed to spiral rapidly out of control, U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations Robert Wood urged a calm and measured approach from Iran and its allied groups, including Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Any hopes that Wood's diplomacy would de-escalate the situation were destroyed when representatives of Hezbollah released the statement, "This crime will certainly not pass without the enemy receiving punishment and revenge." As you've probably already guessed, these words would prove prophetic for the incident that would unfold 2 weeks later. Hossein Akbari, Iran's ambassador to Syria, only further escalated the war of words with the comment, "Israel will definitely get a response to this crime at the right time and the right situation." And April 13th seemed to be the time and the situation in question. A volley of missiles was launched from Iran, Iraq, Yemen, and Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon toward a number of targets, including the previously mentioned Nevatim airbase, which was alleged to be the base where the Damascus consulate strike was launched from. This is where Israel's allies came in: the United Kingdom, France, Jordan, who shot down missiles that passed through Jordanian airspace, and of course the United States. So, returning to our central question, how did the US actually play such a key role in defending Israel from the Iranian sneak attack? It has everything to do with the assets it has stationed in the region. 2 U.S. Navy destroyers, the USS Carney and the USS Arleigh Burke, were stationed in the Mediterranean Sea, where they were able to intercept and destroy at least 6 of the Iranian missiles. The Carney had already earned its stripes in the last few months as it fended off attacks from Houthi rocket launchers and explosive drones in the Red Sea. So it was already prepared for a sneak attack like this. However, it wasn't the only seaborne asset that was vital in helping the U.S. intercept the hundreds of Iranian missiles. The Air Force's 494th and 355th Fighter Squadrons also pulled their weight, according to the White House, achieving dozens of death-defying aerial takedowns. A Patriot missile defense battery based in Erbil, Iraq, also came into play, intercepting and destroying a number of the Iranian weapons. According to retired General Frank McKenzie, the former head of U.S. Central Command, this is considered by many to be a devastating loss for Iran. The missiles expended in the attack were not an insignificant portion of Iran's 3,000 missile stockpile. Also, according to McKenzie, the U.S. utilizes satellite tracking to keep tabs on Iran's stockpile and to provide an early warning system for potential launches, hence why the attack was able to be intercepted and destroyed without incident. After the dust settled, U.S. President Joe Biden released a statement saying, "At my direction, to support the defense of Israel, the U.S. military moved aircraft and ballistic missile defense destroyers to the region over the course of the past week. Thanks to these deployments and the extraordinary skill of our service members, we helped Israel take down nearly all of the incoming drones and missiles." However, while averting the loss of life is always a victory, the attack has left an aftermath of chaos in the Middle East. Inside Israel, political tensions have heightened as Israel's opposition leader Yair Lapid has accused current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of weakening the country's deterrence policy, long thought to be a key pillar in the nation's defense. While the attack has left the embattled Prime Minister with a temporary popularity polling bump domestically, there is no denying that the attack is evidence of deterrence falling short. Commentator Ben Caspit echoed the thoughts of Israeli domestic critics. The Iranians have lost their sense of fear. No more proxies, undercover agents, and covert terror attacks. From now on, it is Iran against Israel out in the open. Israeli deterrence, which got Iran to swallow its pride every time anew and not attack Israel directly, has now been shattered. This would be bad enough on its own, but some commentators have also observed the dark side of the loose coalition of allies that came to defend Israel during the Iranian attack. It's raised a disturbing question for Israel. Can they still rely on themselves for defense in the absence of allies like the United Kingdom, France, Jordan, and the United States? Obviously, this puts Israel in a position that isn't advantageous for anyone. If they want to reaffirm the power of their deterrence policies, they need to strike back against Iran with sufficient force to make an example of them for daring to cross the line. Elements of Netanyahu's inner circle were already gunning for this, such as Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who had already encouraged the Israeli War Cabinet to, quote, "go crazy" in response to Iran's attack. Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari The spokesman for Israel's military also responded, "We cannot stand still in the face of this kind of aggression." The assembled war cabinet proposed a series of response options, as well as the potential major drawbacks of each one. The first was conducting a strike against an Iranian allied target like Iraq or Lebanon, which came with the drawback of seeming, to the members of the war cabinet, underproportioned to Iran's direct attack on Israel. The second option was a strike against a symbolic target in Iran, which carried the drawback of potentially souring relations with the conflict-averse United States. The third option was to conduct a cyber attack on Iran's infrastructure, but this was also deemed as not a proportional response and may have also come with the additional downside of showing Israel's hand too early when it comes to its cyber capabilities. The fourth option was to increase the number of Iran-targeted assassinations performed by Mossad, Israel's security service. But Israel wouldn't directly claim responsibility for those assassinations, losing the propagandistic element of a response to Iran's attack. One thing seemed unanimously clear: Israel couldn't just turn the other cheek on this. This is understandably where allies on both sides of the conflict started to get nervous. The analyst and journalist Daoud Kutab commented that the conflict between Israel and Iran has left the rest of the Arab world terrified of what another regional war could do to an already devastated region. And if it is to take place, there will be not just regional but global repercussions. Any regional Iranian-Israeli conflict will pull in the Gulf countries, but also the US, Russia, and China, creating a potentially explosive global confrontation. Kutab is far from the only one who believes this conflict could boil over with catastrophic consequences. While the US was more than happy to defend Israel from attack, they drew the line at getting involved in any kind of proactive conflict. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called Benny Gantz, an Israeli minister and member of the war cabinet, to stress the fact that while the U.S. would not tell Israel what to do, personally, heightened tensions with Iran wouldn't benefit anyone. President Biden also advised Israel to take the win of thwarting the Iranian attack rather than potentially incurring further reprisals. Said Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, "We condemn these reckless and unprecedented attacks by Iran and its proxies, and we call on Iran to immediately halt any further attacks, including from its proxy forces, and to de-escalate tensions. We do not seek conflict with Iran, but we will not hesitate to act to protect our forces and support the defense of Israel." The tone of de-escalation rippled across the other allies involved in defending Israel from the attack. British Foreign Secretary David Cameron told the BBC that the official position of the UK was against a retaliatory strike from Israel on Iran, and France's President Emmanuel Macron said that he would encourage Israel not to escalate the conflict. Japan and Australia also stepped in to encourage Israel not to conduct any further attacks, while Russian and Chinese government officials urged Iran to proceed with caution in its next actions. Even President Vladimir Putin, who typically loves violence in the ways that fish love water, expressed hope that all sides would show reasonable restraint and prevent a new round of confrontation fraught with catastrophic consequences for the entire region during a call with President Raisi. A joint statement from a G7 leader emergency meeting read, "We demand that Iran and its proxies cease their attacks, and we stand ready to take further measures now and in response to further destabilizing initiatives." There was good reason for international concern about a sudden spike in conflict. After Israel declared that it would retaliate, President Raisi of Iran warned that a swift Iranian response would be inevitable, one that he claimed would leave little left of the Israeli regime. These threats didn't seem to be entirely hot air either, as Iran announced its intentions to deploy warships to the Red Sea to protect Iranian shipping interests. However, if you read between the lines here, and you really don't have to read all that closely, you can see that this is clear saber-rattling from the Iranians. One thing is absolutely clear, even through the fog of war, this isn't over. As of the making of this video, one of the latest counter-moves was a strike on April 19th, where the sounds of explosions and anti-aircraft fire were reported in the Iranian central province of Isfahan, the site of the major Shikari airbase and several key sites involved in Iran's highly controversial nuclear program. The US has staunchly denied involvement in the attack, but Israel hasn't made any official comment, hinting at its likely involvement through omission, just like the Damascus consulate attack. Unlike the Damascus attack, however, there were no reported casualties this time. Iran's been surprisingly casual about the whole affair, claiming that it was little more than a failed attack by 2 quadcopters. However, while the attack was hardly a severe response, this is still likely power posturing on Iran's part, as satellite imagery has illuminated some of the broader details of the likely Israeli attack. According to the BBC and CBS, thanks to the use of optical imaging photos, think the kinds of things you'll see while killing time on Google Earth, and synthetic aperture radar satellite imagery, which uses satellite-based radio waves to map the surface of the Earth, we can see that some minor damage was caused to the Iranian airbase. The base featured an S-300 air defense system, composed mainly of vehicles equipped with radars and missile equipment, that in before and after photos was shown to have been damaged by the Israeli strike. According to both Iran and the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency, none of the nuclear facilities were harmed in the strike, and Iran has not shared any intentions to respond or escalate despite their earlier threats. So why this attack? What would Israel have to gain from this specific course of action? Most foreign policy experts agree that this attack was an Israeli half measure, simultaneously intended to send a message to Iran while also appeasing their international allies' desires to stave off further conflict escalation. This is also crucial, as Isfahan has also been called the cradle of Iran's nuclear ambitions. While Iran has always said that its nuclear development has been to the end of peaceful nuclear power, various members of the international community have cast doubt on this. Clearly, Israel's trying to communicate to Iran that its nuclear production facilities are not out of reach should the war escalate. Another attack that's believed to be in a response to Iran's April 13th assault occurred in Iraq on April 20th. Believed to have been committed by Israel in line with the first option presented by the War Cabinet, the attack struck Kalso military base located 30 miles outside of Baghdad, killing 1 and wounding 8 others. The attack was aimed at striking the Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF, a militia that acts as another of Iran's many proxies. It's likely that this group was also tangentially involved in the Iraqi portions of the April 13th attack, putting them squarely in Israel's crosshairs. The United States has once again denied any involvement in the attack, leaving Israel as the most likely culprit. Many have wondered why Iran's response has been so muted so far, especially given that an escalation in conflict is seemingly in line with their larger plans. The answer may lie in the opinions of Saudi Arabia, as Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged for de-escalation in the aftermath of Iran's initial attack, while also being an ally to the US, though admittedly one with rather large caveats when you take a magnifying glass to the fine print. Tehran has spent at least several years cozying up with the Saudis. Though the outbreak of the war in Gaza delayed the proceedings, talks brokered by China in 2023 solidified peace between the former rival nations, a highly advantageous deal for both parties when it comes to solidifying power in the region. Given that President Raisi has made brokering deals like this with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates a major part of his policy platform, it's likely that the sudden de-escalation was in part a plan to appease their newest allies. So far, we've gotten lucky that this situation hasn't escalated into a region-wide war. All it would take is a single domino to fall and plunge the entire world into chaos. Let's hope that that domino doesn't fall anytime soon. Now check out what would happen if the USA and Iran went to war, military-army comparison. Or watch this instead.